How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I've got a very special guest for you all. Today, I'm joined by a competitive powerlifter. She's been a two-time national champion. She's also a coach as well. Today, I'm joined by the one and only Kristen Dunsmore. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing?
I am not so bad. Thanks a lot
Yeah.
for taking the time to jump on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No
And I really
problem.
appreciate the introduction. You really talked me up there.
Yeah, I always say that if I wasn't doing this or coaching, I'd be like a ring announcer or a commentator.
Yeah.
I think that'd be pretty cool to do that. But how are you? What have you been up to? What's been happening in your world recently?
What's been happening in my world? Oh, well, so I guess I wouldn't call it exciting. I suppose it depends on who you talk to, but I am back in school to pursue a PhD. So that's exciting and stressful at the same time. But yeah, other than that, I really wish that I had some really exciting story to tell you, but I don't. So training ideally. So I didn't compete this year just because I needed to take some time off to really, number one, to kind of give my body a bit of a break, but also just mentally I needed a little to take a step back a little bit. I was burned out for a while, so I'm back to consistent training, and ideally, if everything goes according to plan, I will do a meet in January, and that would be a qualifying meet to compete at, so for Powerlifting America Nationals, depending on how that goes. I may or may not be at Worlds, but we will see.
Yeah. Oh, cool. And kind of two questions from that. What kind of made you want to work towards your PhD? And how do you feel after having, because I can kind of relate to having a little bit of time off from competing, because I haven't competed for the last like year and a half. It's only kind
Yeah,
of now that I'm getting back into the swing of training a little bit. How do you
yeah.
kind of feel for giving your body a little bit of rest and having a little bit of time off?
Uh, so I mean, yeah, after taking time off, I guess the competitive mindset is, I don't want to say it's back, but it's coming back. I think when you first start lifting and you're PRing in the gym every single week, it's really easy to feel motivated and to not skip days and to want to really train and to push yourself. And then over time, a lot of it is, it's no longer really motivating. It's about self-discipline. And so there's plenty of days where it's like, I just don't feel like going to the gym. And then I don't know, somehow I find the self-discipline to do so. And so wanting to go back to school was really because I realized the more that I know or learn, the more I realize how stupid I was before. And I think that as a coach, it's important to continue learning. Also, just at some point, I'm probably won't be an athlete anymore, or at least not not to say not competitively, but I'm getting older, right? Like my body doesn't recover the way that it used to.
Yeah.
So, like, what do I want to do once I decide that, powerlifting is no longer my priority? And I think going back to school and wanting to teach the next generation of coaches and educators is kind of my new goal in life.
All right, cool. And what's your PhD in?
So the degree itself is health and human performance.
Right.
Um, so it's like right now it's, a lot of physiology classes, all the exciting science stuff. So we can
All right,
appreciate.
cool.
Yeah.
Well, I know obviously I gave quite a brief introduction there, but for everyone listening who might not know your background in terms of just sport, getting involved in powerlifting and kind of your progression, if you like, through the sport of training. Just want to give a
Yeah.
little bit of a background to yourself.
Yeah, totally. I did not know what powerlifting was for a long time. I think people hear bodybuilding, weightlifting, powerlifting. It's like, what's the difference? I don't know. And I was always interested in going to the gym, but it was the typical Planet Fitness. And I was kind of intimidated to go over to the dumbbell section because that's where all the meatheads were. So I would stay in my little cardio section and really didn't do any sort of resistance training until I went to college. So I got my undergrad in exercise science and I was working in the human performance lab there. And they were doing a research study, and the program itself was a very heavy powerlifting, traditional DUP style program. And my professor at the time basically said, if you want to work here, you have to actually work out. You can't just go on the elliptical for an hour or whatever I was doing. And so that was my first introduction to squatting and benching and deadlifting. And I guess I was kind of good at it. Everyone was impressed. It probably was not to depth. I was in running shoes, kind of how everyone starts, I feel like. And yeah, that was, oh my God, I'm going to age myself. 2011.
Right.
And it took me 3 years to compete. So my first actual powerlifting competition was in 2014.
Yeah.
So I'd been training and squatting, but not necessarily competing. And it was one of those, I was just really intimidated. I always felt that I was comparing my numbers to, at the time, so Jennifer Thompson, I'm sure you're familiar with her. She's the bench queen. She was kind of the top in my class, and I'm looking at these numbers like, what do I have to do to win? And then I see like a 300-pound, it's like a 140-kilo bench press, and I was like, oh God, I got I gotta wait. And finally, I think my mom ended up signing me up for a meet because I kept finding excuses as to not compete.
Yeah.
And so she was like, well, if I paid for this meet, now you have to do it. And so I did. And there was 3 women who competed. So I won, but out of 3.
Right.
So that just kind of shows you how big the sport has grown since 2014. That was my first competition. I caught the bug, I guess you could say. And as soon as I was finished, I was like, when is the next meet? I want to do, this is amazing. I love this sport. And my next meet was USAPL at the time. They were still part of IPF.
Yeah.
Nationals. And I ended up placing 3rd at that meet. And so after from there, I just, started competing. I think gaining a little bit of a name for myself as an athlete. And then I started working as a coach, and I worked as the strength guys coach. Or when I first started. So I worked with Jason for a long time before I ended up going with another coach who coached me for a few years. And I was also a coach for that company until about 2 years ago when I ended up going on myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know.
Cool.
So I've been competing ever since.
Nice. Well, why I like to ask that, because obviously, when you said there it took a couple of years before you first compete.
Yeah.
A lot of, especially sort of the back end of last year and this year, taking quite a lot of lifters to their first competitions, which has been pretty cool. And a lot of those beginner lifters have been women. And all of a sudden, I'm saying, look at lifters such as yourself and, other athletes, because, I think at Worlds this year, it was the most amount of lifters that there'd ever been, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And when people look at yourself where you are now can sometimes forget that it took maybe a couple of years to do your first competition. And
Exactly.
saying feeling intimidated, how did you kind of how did you kind of get over that or overcome it a little bit? And how has that kind of helped you relate to maybe the lifters that you work with?
Yeah. I would say that after I did my first meet, I was of the mindset that I needed to wait until I was strong enough to feel competitive. And so what I would tell my younger self now, or what I tell my newer athletes, is to do a meet. Don't try to cut weight, don't try to put too much stress on yourself. Just do a meet, get the experience under your belt, and then from there you can try to PR compare, to in your next meet against your old numbers. But I think doing that first meet is going to be important. And regardless of what your numbers are, because you are never going to feel ready. You'll always find a reason not to compete and to hold off. And so once you get that first meet out of the way, I think it makes it a lot easier, because you realize that, everyone else at this local meet is probably their first time too.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of this camaraderie, right? And you meet new people and you make friends who are in this same situation as you are. And I think it's very easy, especially now in the age of social media, to compare yourself to some of the best lifters in the world. But you have to realize, like, for myself, I've been competing since 2014. So that's been 9 years of training. So you're comparing yourself to someone who's been training for 9 years, and here, you are competing for 6 months.
Yeah.
So it takes time.
Yeah. When you said there being strong enough to be competitive, a lot of people's thoughts are sometimes, are they actually strong enough to do a competition? That's something that I get asked quite a lot, or told quite a lot from a couple of from people in the gym who maybe are doing strength training but want to maybe gravitate towards. They've started to hear about powerlifting, because you can type powerlifting on Instagram or anything like that, and loads of things are going to come up. What's kind of your approach, or have you ever come across lifters saying that in terms of, am I strong enough to actually compete?
I get that question a lot. I think that's very common with newer lifters. And I think, just having that unique experience where that was me at one point. So it's very, I can empathize with, those who feel like they're not strong enough. And I can tell you that even some of the best lifters in the world are going to feel like they are not strong enough. I've had that feeling too, where, now eyes are on you. Before, as a local lifter, nobody cares, I guess, right? So it makes it fun. There's no stress. And then as you continue competing and you're getting better, and maybe you're getting noticed a little bit, and then there's a little bit of pressure. So if you don't do well at a meet, and everyone's gonna talk about, ooh, like, did you see Kristen about a squat or something?
Yeah.
So I think those feelings, regardless if you're very new or if you've been competing for a long time, there's always going to feel that there's this feeling of not feeling good enough or being good enough. But I think the reason there's a reason that people continue to do it. There is a love for this sport, and I think that the meet day energy is just something that is inexplainable. It's just like natural high that you feel. And I think that's what people kind of makes them continue to want to compete. And you won't realize that until you've actually done that first one and what it feels like.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I get more excited about taking lifters to competitions now than competing myself. What was really fun, well, not funny, but nice to see, is that I took a woman to her first competition, and then she took like a couple of days off, and then she came back into the gym, and it was kind of that stereotypical post-comp blues, and she was like, "Oh, I'm just back in the gym now. I want to be back on the platform where, there's that buzz of lifting heavier." Whereas when she's come back in, it's now back to the training that she was doing. So I completely understand that Because that's when you said the powerlifting bug, I kind of caught it, came
Yep.
from playing a team sport with rugby. And then literally I remember one of the guys that I used to work with basically said, right, here's a 12-week program. You're going to do a competition with me in 12 weeks. I went, okay, cool, did that. And then I was like, when can I do the next one? When, because it does
Yeah.
become addictive. You do get that high off it.
Yeah.
One thing that you said there with, as you progress, or get maybe noticed a little bit more, eyes are on you a little bit. And there's always that train of thought that the training that we do in the gym, the stronger that you get in the gym, can increase confidence in the gym, but then also confidence outside. How did that kind of help you with maybe your confidence in the gym or outside the gym as well? And well, it's kind of like a double-barreled question, maybe this one. How is there ever like a tipping point where because everyone starts training because it's fun? Is there ever a tipping point where it maybe becomes a little bit too serious? And how do you strike that balance between keeping it fun and enjoying it?
Yeah. So I guess yeah, that's like I said, when you first started, it's so easy, right?
Yeah.
You're PRing, it feels good. You just did your first meet. It's fun. And yeah, just after a while, there's this pressure, I guess. And even in the gym, right? Whether you're competing or not, you always want to have a good session so that you can post it and post your PR, great training session. But then if you start going to the gym and you're fatigued, right? And there's been times where I'm trying to pull 50% of my deadlift and I can barely get it off of the ground. And in the beginning, those were really it ruined my entire day. I'm getting weaker, I suck. It's like these self-negative talk that you tell yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can either make your day great if you do well, or it can ruin your entire day. So it does affect you inside and out of the gym. And I guess one of the things that I've learned over time is that everybody has those training days, even the best lifters in the entire world. We just don't post about it because no one really wants, well, I guess maybe some people want to see you fail, but those aren't the videos that get the likes, right? It's
Yeah.
the PRs that people care about. So I think just recognizing that, everyone has those days, and trying not to let it ruin the rest of your day has been huge. And it does kind of, I guess, over time, where there's no longer it's motivating, it's the self-discipline. And so there's been plenty of times where I've like not wanted to go to the gym and I'm just not into it. And on those days, sometimes I'm just like, I'm just going to drive to the gym.
Mhm.
And if I just get there to the gym, I'm going to work out. So once I'm there, it's fine. So that's kind of been my, like just drive to the gym. And as long as you make it to the gym, you can leave if you want to.
Yeah, I think that's what because obviously why I wanted to touch on that is everyone starts training or getting involved in sport or whatever it may be because they enjoy it and
Yeah.
they stick at it because they enjoy it with the because I think sometimes there's some misconceptions around powerlifting or weightlifting or strongman, any like sort of the strength training sports that it's going to be an intimidating environment and not really have a community and you by yourself. How have you found with the sort of like connections or friendships that you've made through powerlifting, but then also who's kind of influenced you in your training and maybe your coaching as well?
Yeah. So as far as who when I first started, the big names was Jennifer Thompson and Kimberly Walford. So those were the athletes who I strived to be like, or whose numbers I tried to compete with. And as a coach, I would say that my philosophy on training has changed dramatically as it should, right? As more information comes out, you learn. I think as a coach, it's important to adapt to your training philosophies. And I think some of the problems with like these coaches that are very set in their ways, and it's my way or the highway. I know, and it's like those are the ones who get stuck. And I would say that Mike Tuchère, Mike T, I always said his last name correctly. I'm sorry if I didn't. He's had a really strong influence on the way that I coach, especially just the RPE style of training, just because like you and I talked about before, how, maybe you go into the gym and you're just mentally not in it, right? And so your perception of effort is probably going to feel a lot higher than it would be on one of those days where you're like feeling good and you're, ready to smash some PRs and you had your pre-workout and things are feeling great, right?
Yeah.
So that's had a huge influence. And I guess recently would be data-driven strength.
Yeah.
Zach Robinson and Josh Poland, they have really good content. Zach was my coach for a while, but he kind of stopped taking athletes because he's focusing on his PhD, and I think he's actually heavily into his data collection right now.
Yeah.
So that means you don't have a life. So your life is in the lab. So I think that's kind of what he's going through right now. But yeah, he kind of opened up my eyes to a lot of different training methodologies, especially the idea of training to failure. And especially as a power lifter, right? When you're working up to a 1RM and you think that you have to lift heavy every single day because you want to get stronger and lift as much weight as possible. And doing an RPE 5 or 6 and having a lot left in the tank. Number one is just mentally nice, because I'm not like, oh my God, I got a, heavy single today and I'm not feeling it. It's like, oh, I can go to the gym in these days where I'm just not there. It's a lot easier to psych myself up with an RPE 5 than it would be like an RPE.
Yeah, definitely. And I completely know what you mean about that, because I did go through a phase where I just felt as though I was lifting heavy all the time, and I just felt like my body was completely beat up. And I've doing a sort of like a mock meet in December with a couple of guys that I train with and a couple of other people, which I just think it'll be fun. It'll be a nice way to sort of end the year and think about doing a full competition next year if you like. And actually the training building up to it, it's quite nice not feeling quite beat up and realizing that you don't have to lift as heavy, which is good. I know, and you said there, I think it's good to have your thoughts on coaching change over time. I know I've mentioned quite a lot about when I first started coaching, I wanted to say everything and say as much as I could. But then when I'm as I've got a little bit older, obviously I'm not saying as much from there. So with that, how has kind of your knowledge increased so that you can because at the start you mentioned didn't really know what powerlifting was. How has kind of your knowledge on powerlifting grown to be able to coach lifters a little bit better?
Yeah. So it's funny because when I look back at some of the old programs that I wrote from 8 years ago, I'm like, oh my God. Like, I'm so sorry. I think one of the things that I've learned is, so when I was coaching, I would not program for everyone the same, but I don't know, everyone was getting 4 or 5 days a week of benching or 3 days a week of squatting. And what happens when I have a bigger male lifter who is squatting some decent weight, probably 3 times a week, is just, it's too much. Whereas a lighter female lifter who's a 52 kilo lifter, she could get away with squatting 3 days a week and probably feel recovered. So yeah, some of my own training, it would just be being able to really troubleshoot the lifters. So if if a lifter's like, I'm just tired, I'm not recovering well, maybe in the past I would just be like, okay, well, we'll just drop the load a little bit. That was kind of my answer to everything. And I think now it's being able to have a little bit more of a like critical thinking skills, and beyond just like, well, why? Maybe they just didn't sleep well the night before. Maybe they haven't eaten anything all day, or they had this huge exam and they went to the gym after and they're just fatigued. So it's all these things, or these events that can happen, that it's not just lowering the load. It's being able to troubleshoot and really working with athletes to find something that is like really individualized to them. I think that's huge.
Yeah. And do you think with that, because you've kind of been there and done it, you need to kind of because the analogy that I always use is or the example that I always use, I took a couple of years of competing myself before I actually started training powerlifters. And I always liken it to, if you've never played rugby, how are you supposed to coach? How are you supposed to coach rugby? And do you think the fact that you've kind of been there, done that, works with coaches, experienced that communication, you can realize, okay, so this is how I make things more efficient, and develop your own coaching strategies and your own take on it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I've worked with 3 different coaches. Each one kind of had their own training style, and you kind of I don't have one specific training philosophy. I think it's things that I've learned and taken from different coaches and different educators, and like, well, this really worked well, I really like this, and you kind of blend it all together into one. And this is what I tell my athletes too, who want to be a coach, is to don't just do exactly what I do, right? I have this, maybe what I'm doing is wrong. I don't know. I would like to think I'm not, but so to get to keep an open mind and to learn from as many people as possible. And yeah, I will kind of, maybe I'm a little biased, but I would say that I think you need to do a meet and to have been an athlete before you're a coach, because there's a huge mental side to powerlifting. And those days when I have an athlete who's unable to lift the deadlift off from the ground, and their first initial thought is they're getting weaker, and they're this negative self-talk. And so as a coach, you have to kind of talk them off a cliff, so to speak, and it's okay. And I've had a coach where they just kind of was like, didn't know how to handle like my emotions. And so just very kind of standoffish, didn't really know how to talk to me or to talk me down. So I would say that that's been a huge being an athlete. You will not understand what an athlete is going through until you've been through it yourself.
Yeah. Do you think that's where because there's powerlifting is one of them sports now where obviously as a sport it's completely blown up. I know from when I first started competing to where it is now. Like a prime example would be Sheffield at the start of this year. Like, something what was actually really funny is that a couple of people went to the competition. It was the first competition that they'd ever seen, and I just had to say they're not all competitions are like this. But obviously it's blown up, so a lot of people may potentially be training powerlifting, if you like, in the gym, but have maybe not gone on to the competition. So do you think that's where sometimes, because as well, probably a tangent onto that is everyone's always now an online coach as well, but then don't have the experience to do it. Do you think that's where probably maybe not from a coach's point of view, but from a lifter's point of view, it's quite hard to then filter out what's best to listen to, because there might just, some coaches might just be regurgitating what more respected, or I don't know what the right word is, maybe knowledgeable coaches are actually being there and done it, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. And I've seen that too, where someone does a meet and then all of a sudden they're offering coaching services. And I guess, like I said, when I first started coaching and I look back at my programming from 8 years ago, and, like I cringe a little bit. It was, I mean, I wouldn't say it's not good, but if, I would not consider myself a great coach. And so I think it comes with, just learning and trial and error. And as far as like differentiating between a good coach, a reputable coach who actually knows what they're talking about versus someone who didn't meet and they're just regurgitating information and they don't know if that information is accurate or not. And not to say this is the only way, but I do think that having some sort of education is not the be all end all, but I think it's certainly helpful if at least there is some sort of background related to, exercise physiology, sports science, is super helpful. Also, who are they coaching? Are they well-known athletes? Who have they coached in the past? What has their athletes done? And then just as athletes themselves, what have they accomplished as an athlete? And I think all of those together is what you would want to look for. But like in and of itself, just having a great athlete or being a great athlete yourself doesn't necessarily make you a great coach.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's because again, I'll always relate it to rugby as a sport. There's plenty of so the team that I follow in rugby is Leicester. Our new head coach who started this year wasn't actually a very good rugby player. I don't think he represented his country. I think he played at an okay level, but he's actually become quite a well-known coach. But as long as he's actually played the sport, having to competitions, but like what you mentioned, I think we mentioned it right at the start, continuing your education, learning about things is important, because one of the other side of that is like what you touched on there, maybe the softer coaching skills of how to talk somebody down or hype somebody up, or relate to what they're saying. One thing that we kind of touched on is not having one set philosophy, thinking about what's going to work best for that person, and just going back to kind of the actual competition day, actually peaking for a competition. There's different approaches for that. And have you kind of stuck with the same build up to a competition? Has it changed? Have you found things that have gone right and then be like, oh, I might change this, and it's actually gone wrong? What's kind of your approach been to that? Because everyone's always thinking about, oh, well, so and so's doing this, so I must need to do this in the build up to a competition. What's kind of your take on
that? So in general, I would say that a lot of the way that if I, like, for example, if I'm peaking someone, is going to be generally the same. There have been certain situations where I've had a client who she just has to do a meet to get a score, a number on the board. And so it's like, okay, well, we won't really peak for this meet. We'll just, kind of train as is, no tape or anything like that. It's just going to be a normal training week. And then you just text your maxes on Saturday. And, she did really well. Like a lot better than I think both of us were expecting. And I was, like, okay, maybe maybe we don't need to taper. We had done like a meet before where she did do a taper, and I mean she did well, but not as well as she did like no taper. So that was kind of one of those things that, like, if you were to just any sort of like normal powerlifting program, right, like everyone knows that they're supposed to taper the week of a meet. And that's, what almost every coach
Yeah.
probably does. But what do you do when you have a lifter who like responded really well to just training into the meet?
Mhm.
And so even though, you know, science and coaches say to taper, like if I have an athlete who does better without any real, at least a significant taper, like, okay, well, next time we're not going to taper,
Yeah.
and so I think those are kind of things as a coach, that again, you kind of learn over time, is as much as you know there's a coaching style or a coaching philosophy. They're never set in stone. It's never black and white. There's going to be, I know some people who are doing like a really, really high volume training leading into the meet, which is kind of, if you're peaking, you're supposed to be working up to singles because it's specific to the
Yeah.
sport. But if someone does really well and they're doing, like a 5x7 or something, like, on squat leading into the meet, but they do well, it's like, well, who's to say that it's wrong,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of those situations that I think, especially just having experience, is being able to know when it's okay to go against the norm.
Yeah. Do you think with that, because I know with powerlifting, you can get very into the numbers, you can get very into like the data, and
Yeah.
this might be quite we might be going down a rabbit hole here, but
Oh yeah.
I just want to kind of I've always been a case of a little bit like what you've mentioned there, basing it on feel, how we were going to go from there. And I'm also a big believer in if it isn't broken, don't try and fix it. If things are going well, let's kind of ride that a little bit and see where it goes. Do you think that sometimes with how the sport of powerlifting it is, that we try and control too many things, control too many numbers, as opposed to just feeling it out a little bit? Because in the past, before Google spreadsheets, it was just written down. Just what's kind of your take on
Oh.
that?
um so let me see. So like when I started, I would, like the pre-Google spreadsheets, it was like a Word doc and you're just like 5x7 at 60% or whatever. And yeah, I guess like you learn over time. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that's quite a big question, and it's kind of one of those things because everyone uses some form of data to track and look, and it's kind of now because we have that information, we can use it, but then
Yeah.
equally we also need to have that balance of, but how does it feel? And I know from kind of thinking from me as a coach, trying to explain that to lifters is sometimes quite hard because it's like, oh, well, you've put these numbers down. Yeah, but how does
Yeah.
it feel? And matching it towards that, which can be quite hard because I think a lot of, I think certainly a lot of lifters that I know have come from other sports. So they have a background of like, I've been to training sessions before where I felt rubbish, just hasn't felt good. But then all of a sudden come game day, oh wow, everything's feeling really good. Whereas with um, you know, uh, with powerlifting, it can be that case of, look, we need to hit this, we need to do that, and if we don't hit
Yeah.
this number, then the graphs aren't going to go in the right direction, and that means that the world's going to implode, and we're not going
Yeah.
to be able to do anything. So yeah, I think that's it, I always like to ask that question, but I'm not sure it's got a definite answer.
Yeah. Well, I guess, you know, even something like technique, right? When I first started, it was like every little like nitpick, you have to have this perfect squat. And I tend to undercoach
Mm.
rather than overcoach, because especially as like a new lifter, it's like they're going to self-correct on their own even without me saying anything, as they kind of learn the motor pattern. And I think it's like when it comes to lifters and data, it's like you want to track everything. And sometimes it's almost like less is more.
Yeah.
And I get wanting to control every variable, but I think it can almost hinder you because, like I said, there's nothing that is black and white. And on paper, you should be doing this because I don't know, that's what everyone says to do, right? But
Yeah.
then maybe you're, like not responding well to that style of training, for example. And your graph is going down. So I think, yes, I think it's important to track data, definitely, but I don't think that it needs to be the be all end all. And it's important to be able to adjust if needed. And sometimes, if it's straying away from conventional thought.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it. I think sometimes just thinking outside of the box a little bit is, yeah, because I think deep down part of me is like a secret anarchist and just likes chaos and be like, yeah, if everyone's doing this, give this a go and see how it feels.
Yeah.
Not on everything, but I think sometimes, yeah, it's good to do that. Do you think when you said there about tracking that people can actually, maybe not tracking too many variables, but track variables where they're putting effort into, which just isn't worth it. It's just they're not getting any return from it.
Yeah. So I would say, I mean, and I was doing velocity tracking for a while. And it's not to say that it's a, good or bad. But it's, it got to the point where people are tracking every single variable. And if I'm training that day and my velocity, like the weight felt good, but the velocity tracker just said I was like, oh, well, that was equivalent to a 9. And it's like, well, I mean, it felt okay, but this data is telling me that this was really slow and I should stop here. And so in those situations, it's like, well, do you follow the data or do you go by how you feel? I guess it depends.
Yeah, definitely.
As the athlete, I was always like, oh, well, that was like a 7. I'm gonna go up, whether
Yeah,
that was the best choice, I don't know.
yeah,
Um, but that's just kind of like an example of, tracking a data that is helpful, but again, it's not black and white.
yeah. I think I'm glad you've kind of you've said that there is shades of grey a
Yeah.
couple of times, and I'm glad you've mentioned that because it makes me feel as though I'm not going too far wrong because I always kind of explain it as it's just a ballpark. We've got an idea of this because even when it comes to the example that comes straight to my head now is actually being in the gym this morning. They're not doing powerlifting or anything like that. Their goal is just weight loss, fat loss, and the scale had said something like the weight had gone down, but body fat hadn't changed. We did progress photographs, and they just physically look different. And it's kind of as long as we track in some variables, so you have an idea what's going on. Really, the fact is, you look at the photographs and they've changed. They've changed.
Yeah.
Tie that into lifting, nine out of 10 lifters are going to record their lifts,
Yeah.
to look at it, you can see, yeah, actually that moved really well. You can kind of see or feel if it's going to be, an RPE 20 out of 10 if it was that bad. So yeah, I think that's quite important to strike that balance.
Yeah.
I know we've touched on quite a couple of things there, a couple of tangents thrown in, but from everything that we've chatted about there, Kristen, and for everyone listening, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom for everyone listening?
My words of wisdom would be do a meet. Uh, you are never going to be ready if do a meet. And then if you hate it, you don't have to do it again. At least you know that you did it and it was the worst experience ever, or you did it and you caught the bug. That was my amazing words of wisdom.
No, I'm just going to clip that. And if anyone ever says that, what
Do
should
a
I?
meet.
I don't know if I should do a competition. I'm just going to be like, right, where's that clip? Just send it there.
Do a
So
meet.
yeah, Kristen Dunsmore said you've got to do it. Just do it. So that's it. You've got to you've got to do that.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. Really,
Yeah.
really enjoyed chatting with you today. For everyone listening or anyone listening who might have any questions about what we've chatted about, see the content that you put out there, or maybe even get involved in some coaching with yourself, where could people find you or reach out to you?
My Instagram is KRIIS_D. I did recently rebrand my coaching. So it's called Empowerlift Training. So you can also message me there or go to empowerlifttraining.com. And I'm adding content and coaching services and all that fun stuff. So,
Oh, nice. Well, thanks again for taking the time to jump on. Thanks a
yeah.
lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.